What's up, everyone, and welcome to the BG Sports Podcast. I'm Yvette, your host, and today I'm not actually having a podcast. It's more of like a vlog because I'm just here to talk about what I have coming up in the future on the BG Sports Network, and so that's what we're going to do today. So, as you know, football season is over, but that doesn't mean that the fun is over because at Bougie Sports, we are just getting started. We will be with you 365 days of the year. That is so cheesy. I didn't even have that written down. I mean, if you couldn't tell, that just came off the cuff. But yes, so I just, if you followed any of my other podcasts, which I hope you have, and thank you. And if you're here for the first time, thank you too. I know that some people are interested in these Youngstown Mafia pod because it is interesting. And just like me, it's fascinating, especially that I live here in Youngstown, and Cleveland and Pittsburgh were also, part of that mobster circle, and Youngstown being in the middle of Cleveland and Pittsburgh, kind of served as a war zone. And we'll find out. You'll find out if you continue to watch. And I found out as I got more and more interested into it. I want to talk about what got me started. Well, I mean, I've always been interested in it, but what really, really, really got me down this rabbit hole is this podcast on Apple Podcasts called Cricket City. It is absolutely amazing. I'm on my third listen right now. So that's another reason. It's like I wanted to do this podcast, about the mafia, but it's just like I didn't want to just jump right in it. I thought that I could do an episode, and it's more than that. I don't know where to begin, to be honest. And I'm trying to, and so I'm here, the beginning here at the surface with you guys. But I do have some friends that are going to help me along the way. Vince Guerrieri, which he has a lot more, history dealing with this kind of things because he actually worked on this podcast in some way. I don't want to speak on it exactly because I'm not sure. Okay, I wanted to start off by sharing this clip about the podcast that I was talking about. So here we go. This is our local news in Youngstown.
Covered with research for the podcast Cricket City, which drops on Monday.
These are the transcripts from when the Crimetown brothers taped Jim Traficant accepting bribes.
Crime Time, Bomb Town, Mob Town,
Murder Town,
Murder City, USA.
Youngstown's biggest employers were the steel mills and the mob.
Nationally renowned producer Mark Smerling took much of Chickatelli's 7 years of research to create the podcast.
I can't underestimate the value of Johnny and what he did at WKBN, to be honest. Going through all those dusty old boxes, looking at, tons and tons of tape all day long.
In 2016, Smerling dropped a podcast called Crimetown, which focused on organized crime in Providence, Rhode Island.
And I'll never forget, he called me in 2019, and I said, I've been waiting for you to call. I said, this is Crimetown. No offense to Providence, but Youngstown is Crimetown.
Crooked City starts with the closing of the steel mills and follows the timeline of Jim Traficant.
I want to look at each and every camera because I'm stone cold nuts, and I'm going to say it. The mob should get out of Youngstown.
There's a lot of things in here where you think you know the story, but then you hear it and you say, wow, I didn't know that.
Smerling made 8 visits to Youngstown and was given tours.
And showed me where the All-American Club was and the Numbers Bank.
Having covered organized crime now in 2 cities, Smerling has a unique perspective.
There's a fraternal and familial aspect to it that creates this sort of twisted forgiveness, right? People do bad things and they still get forgiven for it.
I asked why start the story of Youngstown's organized crime in the 1970s when it began in the 1930s. Well, Mark Smerling only tells true crime stories with first-person narratives, and there's no one around to talk about what happened way back when.
Okay, so that was just, like I said, a little clip from our local news, and I just wanted to make sure I gave credit to that podcast and the people that put that podcast on, because it was absolutely amazing. Like I said, it's called Cricket City, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts. And I highly recommend that you listen to it, especially if you're from anywhere in Northeastern Ohio, because it covers all that type of history. So today, I wanted to just, dig in and share a little bit of some of the YouTube clips and things that I've been watching in preparation for this podcast that I have coming up. And so it's kind of be like a watch show with me.
Little Chicago, just one of many labels the city of Youngstown has worn over the years. Steel Town was the most noble. It reflected the very essence of this community. Its strong ethnic mix produced a tough blue-collar class of people who worked to liken a small city like Youngstown to a major one might engender a burst of civic pride. But the analogy to Chicago was not meant to be complimentary. It's just that both cities were infested with murderous gangsters. Big Chicago had Al Capone. He considered himself a modern-day Robin Hood. Capone provided bootleg whiskey to people who preferred partying to prohibition, and soup kitchens to the down and out during the Depression. The former bodyguard and hitman rose to power by first rubbing out those he was hired to protect, and then anyone else who got in his way, giving all a lavish send-off. The gangland-style killings here in the early 60s were far less frequent than those in Capone's days, but every bit as brutally violent.
Youngstown's really going downhill, but you just don't hear very many nice things about it anymore. The people from out of town really, like you said, think it's Little Chicago.
A writer proclaimed that crime was to Youngstown what movies were to Hollywood and cars to Detroit. In the early days, a man known as Public Enemy Number 1 in Buffalo, before authorities there ran him out of town, settled here. Joe the Wolf DiCarlo tied up with local hood Jasper Fats Aleo, setting up a horse betting and numbers racket. From Michigan to Trumbull County came another nationally known criminal, Frank Camarada, a member of Detroit's notorious Purple Gang. He tried to muscle in on the lucrative jukebox trade here, but was driven off by local thugs with similar interests. And then there was Warren Kingpin, Tony the Dope Del Santer, and his two powerful underlings, John and Mike Farah. The Farahs ran a celebrated gambling casino, the Jungle Inn, in a place called Hall's Corners in Liberty Township, just outside the Youngstown city limits. Smash rackets rule. They got the local phone company to literally pull the plug on Joe DiCarlo's horse race wire service that operated in bookie joints fronted by seemingly legitimate businesses. Allen and Vice Chief Dan Magnetti had flying squad. They put such a crimp in DiCarlo's gambling operation that he left town, fled to Miami. But Chief Allen's biggest coup came where he had no jurisdiction. He convinced state authorities to launch a massive raid at the Jungle Inn in August of '49. The raid almost touched off a gun battle between lawmen and thugs inside. One was ordered by John Farah to start shooting. He thought better of it and didn't. All gambling equipment was smashed or confiscated, and the Jungle Inn was shut down by agents as a fire trap for various building code violations. Allen and Henderson claimed victory in some battles during their 6 years in office, but when they left in 1953, Allen admitted they hadn't won the war. He noted that the criminal element was deeply rooted here and chastised city residents for being willing participants. A local mob expert agrees.
Who is responsible ultimately is the public. If the public doesn't want gambling, you're not going to have gambling. There's a market. That market is going to be met because it is a profitable one.
Allen also blasted politicians who, if not controlled by the gangsters, he said, were reluctant to take a public stand against them. He even skewered Congressman Mike Kerwin of Valley Sacred Cow, who introduced a bill in Congress to block the deportation of Frank Camarada, by then a rising mafia don. Critics called it a stinker bill because it reeked of mob influence. Kerwin admitted doing so at the request of a friend of the Licavoli crime family in Cleveland. Ironically, as Henderson and Allen knocked down the big gambling operations and houses of ill repute run by the few, the many began to scramble for a small piece of what was left. The 50s were marked by no less than 80 unsolved bombings. 2/3 of them occurred outside the city, and its new leader felt that Youngstown got a bum rap and a new demeaning name, Bombtown.
In my first year in office, there was some bombings, and when they added them up, they claimed there was 30-some bombings. Gee, 30 bombings in the area, and I think we only had 3 or 4 actually in the city.
Most of the city's bombings in the 50s caused minor damage and rarely any injuries. But that would change drastically as Youngstown closed out the decade. City voters raised some eyebrows by electing ex-Judge Frank Franco as mayor shortly after he'd been thrown off the city bench for fixing parking tickets. Word quickly spread that the city would be wide open again, and that could spell serious trouble. Even before Franco took office, a bomb blast rocked the city's north side, and Youngstown's sordid reputation moved up a notch on the scale of shame from Bombtown, Ohio to Murder Town, USA. Youngstown's first gangland-style killing took the life of Chris Sophocleus of Camel in May of '59. He had just left the apartment of a lady friend on Park Avenue when he was blown away in a car bombing. Among those questioned in the bombing, rising Struthers Rackets figure Ronnie Carabia. He too apparently knew the woman, dubbed the aluminum blonde by the press because of the striking color of her hair. Carabia and Sophocleus allegedly had a fist fight over the blonde. He was never charged in the Sophocleus slaying. Ronnie Carabia is now serving a life sentence in the car bombing death of Cleveland mobster Danny Green in the 70s. Still others thought the killing of Sophocleus may have been linked to an underworld fight for control of Barboot. That's a fast-paced, high-stakes dice game that produced huge revenues to finance mob activities and buy influence. The case was never solved.
There was some Greek outfit here at Barboot at one time and that. But as these mob outfits came in, they started taking over. With the muscle they had, they didn't have much trouble getting them out of the way.
A year later, late winter of 1960, one of the most sensational gangland killings in local history took place. It claimed the life of racketeer S. Joseph Naples. Everybody called him Sandy. He'd done a long stretch in prison for severely beating a man during a robbery that netted just $2.12. Sandy made big headlines in 1958 while serving a gambling sentence in the Mahoney County Jail. He was caught slipping out on weekends to see his girlfriend. It was going to see her, Marianne Verancich, that led to Sandy's demise. Old-timers said you could set your watch by him. Every night about 11, he'd arrive on her front porch on Caledonia Street on the city's south side. That night, 2 hitmen stepped out from the shadows and gunned him down. Marianne had just opened the door to greet him. She, too, was killed by gunfire.
I attempted to talk to him. He appeared serious. However, I thought she would survive and we'd be able to talk with her at a later date. And she also expired. But this is where the scene was, and she was outside the door, and he was lying right in here, partially behind this rail.
Sandy did not go quietly. He emptied his .38 snub-nosed revolver, but police couldn't find any blood trail to indicate that he'd hit either of his fleeing assassins. A shotgun left at the scene and a machine gun found 2 years later in a nearby storm sewer were linked to the slayings, but nothing ever came of it. Charlie Carabia was one of many possible suspects questioned in the Naples hit. No one was ever charged. Following the slaying of Sandy Naples, the mob killing field shifted from Youngstown to Trumbull County. During the summer of '61, another member of the racket's hierarchy fell victim to a shotgun blast. Mike Farah of Jungle Inn fame was peppered with pellets outside his home in Warren. He was practicing some golf shots on his front lawn when a gunman fired from the back seat of a car that sped around the corner and kept going. The rumor mill had it the Cleveland gambling interests who were trying to muscle in may have knocked off Farah. The only thing certain, the one-time king of the jungle would prowl Trumbull County no more. With Farr's demise, the murder scene again shifted back to Youngstown, and the method of killing changed from shotguns back to bombs. Target, acknowledged gambling overlord Vince De Niro. He had turned himself in for questioning in the Sandy Naples rub-out more than a year earlier. It had been rumored then that Naples had his eyes on De Niro's gambling empire with intentions of moving up. But if there was a connection, it couldn't be proven then. He was released without charge.
De Niro owned Cicero's restaurant here on the South Side. It was torched in later years, but it was very much a part of the bustling uptown section in July of '61.
De Niro left the restaurant that summer night, crossed Market Street to his parked convertible, turned the key in the ignition, and was blown to bits. The force of the blast so severe it shattered plate glass windows in 20 nearby businesses and shook homes for blocks around. One of the car's fenders was found on a nearby rooftop. A curious crowd quickly gathered to see what they had heard, some coming from miles away. It was a Sunday night, and authorities noted that if the blast had occurred earlier, it might have caught the crowd leaving the nearby Uptown Theater. As it turned out, no one else was hurt or killed. Riding high in the prime of his life, Vince De Niro was suddenly gone. He was just 39. A year later, the tit-for-tat theory surrounding the Naples De Niro slaying surfaced once again. A younger brother of Sandy Naples, Billy, was mangled in a car bombing on Madison Avenue on the north side. The blast said to be more powerful than the one that killed De Niro. A fireman who responded from a station house right across the street remembers it well.
Just seen some flames coming out from the garage. Got closer there and looked, and they said there was somebody in the car. Didn't know who it was or what happened here. Later,
You knew Billy, though, didn't you?
lived across the street from us, but I didn't recognize him there. I didn't know who it was until later, and they told me who it was.
Billy Naples was armed with a loaded revolver when the end came and was clad in dark clothing. He wore black leather gloves, although it was summertime. Police speculated Naples may have been going out on a hit or a burglary and was double-crossed. There had been a number of safe crackings then. Billy had been driven to his rig car by Dominic Moyo, a known bomb expert and arsonist from the Canton area. He became the prime suspect, but was never charged. With Sandy and Billy now gone, control of the Naples family passed to its youngest member, little Joey.
I think it's a shame that the racketeers want to kill each other. It's all right with me. Let them go on killing themselves. I think Youngstown would be a better place to live.
As the bodies of gangland violence continued to pile up, citizens grew weary of the carnage and all but immune to the gruesome scenes of slaughter. But even the most hardened among them were not prepared for what happened 4 months after the Billy Naples slaying. The crime that shook the nation occurred at the north side home of Cadillac Charlie Caballero the day after Thanksgiving.
Caballero was a self-proclaimed grape salesman, but police believed that he had mafia ties. He planned to drive from his home here on Roslyn Drive downtown to pay a bill and drop 2 of his young sons off at football practice along the way.
When the three climbed into the car and Caballero turned on the ignition, a tremendous explosion shook the neighborhood, all but disintegrated the car and collapsed the garage, killing Caballero and his 11-year-old son, Tommy. Somehow, 12-year-old Chucky Caballero miraculously survived, though maimed for life with a severe hip injury. People were outraged.
I think it's terrible. It's really a shame that it had to happen to somebody that young. Someone who really doesn't even know what's going on yet.
Caballero bombing deaths drew nationwide attention at a time when Attorney General Robert Kennedy was convening a crime commission who wanted to expose and try to stamp out mafia activity in this country. 40 FBI agents flooded the city of Youngstown and sifted through 3 years of gangland killing evidence. They allegedly offered one potential snitch a stack of money to tell what he knew, but he wouldn't talk.
He said, if you give me money from the floor up to my chin, he said, I can't tell you because I'd never live to spend it. They'll tell you off the record, but they will never go in to testify. So unless you got evidence, there's nothing you can do.
The FBI had a reputation of solving 19 of 20 cases, and the man who spearheaded the Caballero investigation here was confident, even though the trail was growing cold.
We don't give up on these cases. Once it's open, we continue it really forever. For instance, it took us some 6 years to solve the Brinks case, which we worked continuously for that period of time. And we intend to work this one until we come up to a solution.
But despite good intentions, like all the other gangland hits here, the Caballero bombing was never solved. Or was it? Nearly a year after the Caballero bombing, the charred body of a man was found at a strip mine south of Canton. It was stuffed into the burned-out trunk of an abandoned car. The victim was shot in the head. It took fingerprints to identify the body as that of Dominic Moyo, the hitman for hire suspected in both the De Niro and Naples bombing deaths. Lawmen speculated the mob itself put out a contract on Moyo for botching the Caballero job by inadvertently involving 2 innocent children.
And so it was in Youngstown in the early 60s. Several years of senseless bloodshed finally brought to a close, but only at the cruel expense of one young life and the maiming of another.
An icon in our area, but wow, I have seen that before, and it was really awesome to watch again. And what really makes that cool is that is a lot of what takes place before Jim Traficant comes along in the 1970s. And that's exactly where we start in Cricket City. So I think that's really interesting to know a little bit of the backstory. I was trying to, I don't know if, write down, first of all, I was trying to put the TV's full screen so you didn't have to see me in the side, but it wouldn't work and I didn't want to stop. And then I was trying to write down some of the street names that they said and some of the things that happened, like the Naples murder. I'll just have to go back and look. And I think I'm just going to take a ride and go down the streets that they spoke of. And I think it's interesting. I went to the old steel mills too a couple weeks ago when it was really nice, and just sat there and try to take in some of the history of what happened and try to think about how it must have been when the steel mills were booming and the economy was booming back in that day in Youngstown. So I'm not quite sure if this is legal, but that kind of makes it more cool. But I just wanted to see if I can get a look at this old steel mill, and I don't know, just interested. Old Steel Town USA. I feel like badass.
Beam me up. I say it's time for Congress to shove these illegal tactics right up the assets of the IRS.
There used to be a joke in Youngstown, Ohio. This was back in the late 50s and early 60s when the place was widely known as Crimetown or even Murder Town, Ohio. For $2, the joke went, a Youngstown barber will cut your hair. For $3, he'll start your car. Car bombs were much in fashion back then. It was the mob's favorite way of dealing with competition. Between 1951 and 63, there were 75 bombings. The FBI investigated, as did the IRS. There was a certain level of civic indignation, but not much changed. Now, at last, things may be changing. The latest organized crime and public corruption investigations have led to 78 convictions in just one congressional district. And the congressman from that district, Democrat James Traficant Jr., thinks the feds may be after him next. I'll be talking to Congressman Traficant a little later in this program. So far, among those convicted, the county prosecutor, a judge, a second judge has been indicted but not convicted, 2 county commissioners, the sheriff, the county engineer, and the man who ran Traficant's congressional office in Youngstown, who was an admitted bagman for the Youngstown mob. We begin with a couple of reports from Nightline correspondent Chris Bury.
There was a contract placed on my life because the Strollo organization knew that they couldn't fix cases with me.
To understand just how brazenly and brutally organized crime has operated in Youngstown, consider what happened on Christmas Eve, 1996, to the newly elected Mahoning County prosecutor. Paul Gaines was making a phone call in his kitchen when the door flew open and a man with a revolver walked in.
I saw the pistol. I looked at his face and I pivoted to my right and he fired. And as I pivoted my arm, I swung my arm up and the slug went through my arm into my side. He fired a second round as I was falling down. I fell on the floor, and the next thing I remembered, I woke up.
The gunman squeezed the trigger a third time, but the revolver jammed and he fled. Gaines was able to call for help before he passed out.
They shot a man who was elected to be the county prosecutor because they believed that they couldn't bribe him.
The bungled attempt to murder the county prosecutor turned out to be a pivotal moment for Youngstown. A team of FBI agents and federal prosecutors had already been investigating Ohio mobsters and their longtime grip on illegal gambling. But the shooting of Paul Gaines led them to a web of corruption, connecting the mob to the very fabric of the courts, local government, and indeed everyday life in this county.
When the mills were really thriving in Youngstown, there was a steady stream of workers pouring out of the mills with ready cash who were ready, willing, and able to sit down at gambling games and play. So there was plenty of money to be made from the rackets, from the gambling.
There was the Cleveland faction and the Pittsburgh faction. And back in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, we had our share of car bombings. The media referred to us as Little Chicago.
As the two factions vied for control of the city's rackets, so many mob bombings rocked Youngstown, 75 over a 12-year period, that in 1963, the Saturday Evening Post called it Crimetown USA.
There were a number of very violent killings. It culminated in a bombing of a guy named Charlie Cadillac Caballero, in which he was killed, one of his sons was killed, and another one was seriously injured. And that apparently was so brutal that it led to a peace for a decade or so.
But in the early 80s, Youngstown's reputation took another hit. Jim Traficant, the flamboyant county sheriff, was caught on tape talking to Charlie and Orland Carabia, two brothers in the Cleveland mafia. In this excerpt, they discussed contributions Traficant had taken from them and from the mob in Pittsburgh during his campaign.
They have given $60,000. So we gave 60, what did we give? Okay, 103. Good. So now that's two-thirds of the pie. Quite right there.
In his 1983 jury trial on federal charges that he took $163,000 of mob money, Traficant represented himself, though he's not a lawyer, and beat the Justice Department. His acquittal made him a folk hero, and he's now been elected to Congress 8 times. But the Internal Revenue Service never bought Traficant's story that he was somehow setting up a sting before he was even elected.
There's a federal tax court that has examined all of the evidence, and it's concluded, among other things, that he accepted bribes from organized crime figures to influence his performance as sheriff, that he engaged in fraud to conceal it, and that he laundered the money, some of that money.
Bliss bankrupted yesterday, putting 500 of my workers on the street due to 2 reasons. Number 1, the continuing flood of illegal steel imports.
In Congress, Traficant is best known for his biting speeches on behalf of blue-collar workers and his bad haircuts, 70s suits, and trademark sign-off.
Beam me up!
But in the last few weeks, Youngstown's colorful congressman has been railing against an old enemy, the Justice Department, that he worries will soon indict him again. A source close to the case confirms that Mr. Traficant is now the target of a federal grand jury investigation.
They better not make a damn mistake, because I think the American people are fed up with being targeted. And if there's anything I've done, it's something that anybody else in Congress has done, and they're trying to make mountains out of molehills, and I won't stand for it.
His office has acknowledged turning over payroll and phone records. A grand jury has summoned a number of his staffers, and FBI agents here in Youngstown are investigating allegations the congressman received gifts he never reported. including construction work on an elaborate horse barn and a couple of expensive cars. Then there are the congressman's friends. George Alexander, his legal advisor during the trial, pleaded guilty to encouraging that mob hit on prosecutor Paul Gaines. Charles Onesti, Traficant's top aide in Youngstown for nearly 14 years, testified he was a bag man, taking money from the mob to a candidate elected county sheriff.
I truly believe that the congressman has used his office as a lounge for the mob.
In the spring primary, State Senator Bob Hagan made the mob a major issue in his losing bid against Traficant, who angrily denied any connections to organized crime.
And they have a hell of a record, and the mob hates Jim Traficant. In fact, Jim Traficant's life has been threatened by the mob, and I've had about enough of it.
That kind of bluster and bravado have always played well in Youngstown, where talk radio confirms Traficant's local reputation of standing up for the little guy.
Working hard for this community. Guys, you just pick things out of the air and attack this.
When I ran for sheriff in a mob separated, Ted. He's now deceased.
Now, what's going to happen to you? Do you think you're going to be indicted? They went after, and three of the people they convicted are old friends of yours.
Year 2000.
Now, you've got me.
And I'm giving them when I ran for sheriff.
6 minutes. We'll be joined by Congressman James Traficant when we come back. And joining us now from Capitol Hill, Ohio Congressman James.
Okay, that's really interesting. Sorry, like I said, sorry to cut that off, but that's all just crazy interesting. I wanted to jump in and show another real quick part at the end when he interviews Jim Traficant. So hold on for that.
Congressman,
how are you, Ted?
I'm very well. As someone who's been serving his district now for, what is it now, 16, 17 years?
15 years.
15 years. You must be thrilled at the way that the federal government and local authorities are starting to clean the place up. 78 convictions over the past few months.
And it all started from 1980 when I ran for sheriff in a mob-dominated town, played brother against brother, danced between the raindrops, beat them with their own money, was indicted by the mob, and where the FBI was on the payroll of the mob. This is a hell of an ordeal, Ted, with a continuing animus from 1980 to the year 2000.
Now you've got me,
and I'm giving them credit.
You've got me a little bit. You've got me a little bit confused here, Congressman.
Don't get confused.
Well,
I'm giving them credit for what they've done. But even this last investigation, they used the predicate evidence and evidentiary material from the Traficant trial 20 years ago to officially go after these people.
And apparently, some of the people they went after, I mean, when you say you're giving them credit, at least three of the people they went after and three of the people they convicted are old friends of yours, people who work for you.
That's right.
Now,
the one person lied to me to protect his sons, who are two of the finest people in our valley, the Onestis, and he lied to me to try and shield me from political problems. Once I knew about it, he was separated, Ted. He's now deceased.
Now, what's going to happen to you? Do you think you're going to be indicted?
Well, let me say this to you, Ted. They could have got the stuff they got on me out of the library. It surfaces right before election. I doubt if there's any politician in America that could have been reelected with the buzzard circling and the shark circling with all the leaks coming out of the federal government. So I think they have to indict me, because if they don't, I can prove a false confession 20 years ago, a continuing animus through all these years, and I'm going to sue them. I'm either going to be going to jail, Ted, or I'm going to be one of the richest guys you've ever interviewed, but there's no in between. I'm going to fight them.
What are they going to indict you on, do you think?
I don't know. I'm not leaking anything. They are. But when I go to court, I'm going to represent myself.
Well, you must have some sense of what it is, because
Ted, I don't know.
Because I heard you.
I do not know.
Let me finish the question, because I heard you on C-SPAN just the other day in which you were saying that basically what they're coming after you for, every congressman up there has done at one time or another. What were you
From
talking
what I'm
about?
hearing from the people they're talking to, that's evidently the whole situation. You're a member of Congress. You help people in your district. But let me say this.
But what were you talking about specifically, though? I mean,
I'm not talking about anything specifically.
Well,
and I'm not on trial. Are you a representative of the government, Ted?
Hell no.
If they want to charge me, Jim Traficant is coming to court. I'm going to look them in the eye again, representing myself without an attorney. And here's what I want to say. Get your best hold. I think too many Americans fear our government. And let's look back now. 40 years ago, J. Edgar Hoover said there was no organized crime. And the reason he did that, Ted, because he was a transvestite with a woman's dress with photographs that the mob compromised them.
No one, Mr. Traficant, has ever accused you of being anything less than colorful. But since you're insisting on this interview only being 6.5 minutes,
that's right.
At least
How
let me
much
get.
time do
At
you
least
have?
you got about 1.5 minutes
Go
left.
right
You ought to be able to go through a few more stories about.
But I want to know
Hoover.
why the FBI has never been investigated in Youngstown. Youngstown has got a dirty eye. And you know why it's got that dirty eye? Not from the politicians there. The FBI was corrupt. The FBI agent in charge, Stan Peterson, who could sue me as I speak, Ted, was on the payroll of the mob. And when he retired, he was appointed the chief of police of Youngstown. And I'm tired of Youngstown getting bad rap when they're nothing compared to Pittsburgh, Cleveland, New York, and Chicago. And let's get off it. The FBI was corrupted in Youngstown, and I'm going to prove that in this trial.
Since you have already mentioned the particular gentleman from the FBI there, you were sheriff at the time. If you knew that about him, why didn't you arrest him?
I didn't know it till my trial. And soon as I said that I suspected him, he retired as the chief of police of Youngstown. Now, I'm not on the House floor, Ted. He could sue me, but here's what came out at my trial. The affidavit said that he was appointed chief of police of Youngstown, was on the payroll of the mob, and the agent who submitted the affidavit did not ask for an investigation. This Justice Department is out of control. You want my opinion? But let me tell you, a son of a truck driver from Samuel Street, I have a better chance than most of the people have had from our valley. But our valley doesn't deserve the bad rap they're getting. The FBI should be investigated, and I'm going to announce this on your show. I am submitting a Freedom of Information Act request this week on Stan Peterson and the corruption of the FBI in Youngstown, period.
Congressman, we ran out of the time that you gave me about 20 seconds ago, but I thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
I'll be back.
Okay. Okay, so that was the first time I've ever seen that before. I mean, now do you understand when I said, like, I can't do one podcast? And this is exactly where Crooked City starts, with Jim Traficant. And me, born and raised in Youngstown during this, didn't know much. So it's finding things out for the first time. And like when I listened to Crooked City for the first time, I put it in my headphones and just listened to it, and it was so good. It was so good. So again, you should definitely listen to that on Apple Podcasts. There's a group called Youngstown Mob on Facebook, and I put a post on there a few weeks ago and said I was going to start doing this podcast, and I was looking for help on anything, and man, tremendous amount of help and comments, and like just by that too is another reason why I'm like, people take this really seriously, which as they should. And I just want to do it justice. So, just so everything I know is new, and I'm finding this out for the first time. So some of you guys might know a lot of this history. Some of you guys might be finding this out for the first time, just like me. And so we're all in this together. All right. Well, after seeing that interview right there, I just think that right now I just made my mind up that the next episode or the next podcast that I do has to be just about Jim Traficant, just alone, just him, because that's just so much. And it's a good place to start. Also, really quick, also in that Facebook group, I learned about a lot of events that they have around the area. I seen that Emil Denizio was at Warren somewhere. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry, I don't remember. Let me look it up real quick so that I can put it on here. I will add that to this. I wish I had the opportunity to go, but I didn't see about it till last minute. But I would love to, attend those type of events. And I also want to hear your stories that you have. So contact me at yvette@bougiesports.com. And if you want to help me with this podcast, maybe talk or even lead me in a good direction, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, thank you. I've been visiting some of the areas that they well, actually historical landmarks in this area. So I'm going to be recording those as well when I get to visit those places like the Jungle Inn, and there's a lot of places that I want to visit. So I've been to Camel and Struthers area lately, and I will show a teaser, but I did go somewhere, and hold on a second. All right. I did visit someplace, and I may or may have not taken something with me. I don't know. I guess I was just feeling bad, Maybe it's just like watching all this mafia stuff or whatever. But I wanted to take mementos. But yes. So this is from some place in Camel, Ohio. That who knows? I mean, doesn't say. Who knows what this brick has seen? And I'm going to add it to my collection over here somewhere, and see what other little treasures or artifacts I can gather along the way. So thank you guys for watching. Again, if you want to help, maybe come on the podcast, any of you guys from Crooked City, or anybody telling stories, or anyone who knows anyone, knows a guy that knows a guy who knows a guy, or I don't know, any of you guys on the Youngstown mob page. So who knows? Maybe we'll start the journey here in Youngstown and then travel on to the Cleveland area and visit some of their so much room for activities. All right, thank you guys so much. Again, keep it classy and have a good night.
March 30th, 2000.
We had a generation of public figures that sold their souls to the mob.
Youngstown, Ohio, where the mob owned the government.
They shot a man who was elected to be the county prosecutor because they believed that they couldn't bribe him.
I saw the pistol. I looked at his face and I pivoted to my right, and he fired.
Youngstown, where a federal strike force has netted more than 70 convictions.
I got a funny feeling there's more to come.
Youngstown, where the local congressman is now under a cloud of suspicion.
The congressman's top aide is admitted to being a bagman for the mob.
If there's anything I've done, it's something that anybody else in Congress has done.
Tonight, Youngstown, still Crimetown.